Our speaker for this evening is Innovation Manager in ESB Generation and Trading. She is responsible for leading innovation activities and R&D demonstration projects. She has a particular focus on the role of renewable H2 in delivering net zero 2040, a core part of ESB's new strategy. So without further ado, I'd like to hand you over to your speaker for this evening, Dr. Meadhbh Connolly. Meadhbh, over to you.
Thank you. Good evening all. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak to you this evening. I'd like to thank the North West Region of Engineers Ireland for their invitation. I'm originally from the Midlands, but my career in ESB started in the Northwest in Bellacorrick Peat Station around the time of the newly commissioned wind farms. And nobody back then could have dreamed about the level of wind development that has taken place, will be achieved in the following 30 years. And while there has been huge progress, when we stand back and look at the economy as a whole, we're only at the start of the journey. I'll discuss this in more detail later. So ESB recently launched a very ambitious and exciting net zero strategy. And when you dive into the detail of that, realize just how big that challenge is, especially for a generation business. And it's not just about building lots and lots of renewables. It is that and much more. There's a lot in this presentation, and if anyone wants to discuss anything in more detail afterwards, please feel free to contact me in the next days and weeks. So ESB's net zero strategy aligns very well with the EU strategy for energy system integration that was launched back in 2020, which basically calls for use of less energy where possible, then electrify as much as possible, and then lastly, use a renewable molecule, including green hydrogen. And as we decarbonize our system, it's really important to bear in mind the energy trilemma. That's where you're trying to balance sustainability, affordability, and energy security. And Ireland has scored very highly in energy affordability and sustainability over the last number of years. But I want you to keep in mind the grade C that we scored for energy security back in 2021, as I highlight the consequence of necessary and correct decarbonisation action decisions and the need for urgent planning to secure our energy system. In particular, primary energy storage needs to be centre stage as we decarbonise. So we started 100 years ago with a highly renewable electricity system powered by Ardnacrusha. And then we progressively carbonised our system as we became pyromaniacs and discovered the convenience of burning fossil fuels to produce electricity. The power output was dispatchable, which makes for a very reliable system where the generated electricity can be just adjusted up and down to meet demand. And it was also easy to stockpile fuels in oil tanks, in the coal yard, in peat bunkers, and making the electricity system very secure for a few weeks in case of fuel supply interruptions. We woke up, albeit late, to the carbon problem, and we focused on building renewables. However, fossil-based dispatchable generation still underpins the reliability of the system, and the primary energy storage, the oil tank, the coal yard, the peat bunker, the gas field, and the large valve to European gas supply secures this energy system. As we close oil, peat and coal generating stations, which is the correct decision as we decarbonise, and their associated primary energy storage, we dilute the security of the electricity system. If we were to take out the fossils entirely and just have renewables, well, we'd have a renewable electricity system, which is intermittent and not secured. If heat and transport are electrified, and we no longer have tanks of oil in our driveways, our bus depots, our back gardens, then a weather-dependent electricity system will have a greater significance in the overall Irish economy. And if we extend the reach of our renewable generation into the hard-to-abate sectors, such as the high-temperature heat and heavy transport, using hydrogen produced from renewable electricity, we can achieve a zero-carbon energy system. But we don't want a scenario where we have to check the weather forecast to see if the 46A electric bus will be running, or if the heavy goods vehicles can have enough renewable hydrogen to deliver food to supermarkets. To ensure a reliable system where energy is available on the calm, dark days, as well as the windy or sunny days, we need to add in zero carbon dispatchable generation that can be ramped up and down as needed to meet demand. But these dispatchable generators need the zero carbon fuel, So to secure this zero carbon system and supply strategic and operational fuel reserves for this dispatchable generation, we need to store enormous quantities of energy. So the foundation for net zero is based on four large infrastructural elements, namely renewables, hydrogen, zero carbon dispatchable generation, and storage. And don't be deceived with this simple four-piece jigsaw because it's not easy. The delivery of this infrastructure needs to be planned within a whole system integrated approach that aims to synchronize all the elements to build a secure, resilient, reliable system at the lowest cost to the customer. Hydrogen is not last mile on the net zero journey. We urgently need to enable development of renewable projects for hydrogen production as well as for electricity, so that we can transition dispatchable generation from fossil fuels to renewable hydrogen. And we need to develop large-scale storage projects, which are no regrets, delivering security of supply in the short term and enabling transition to the zero carbon solutions in the longer term. Let's look at storage. Storage is often talked about through a technology lens, but needs to be considered both in time and scale. So many in the industry focus on the intraday time scale. So that's time shifting the demand or the generation so that they align. And there are lots of solutions that are needed for this intraday storage, which also provide zero carbon system services. It manages curtailment and congestion and provides energy balancing. And we need all of the options in this space. We need the flywheels, we need the lithium ion and the flow batteries, we need compressed air and liquid air, we need thermal energy storage, we need pump storage, we need vehicles to grid, and we need active demand shifting. I want us to focus on the longer term storage, the periods of no wind that will exist regardless of how much installed capacity. So what is the 10-day storage solution? What's the backup to renewables for the so-called Dunkelflaute events when there's no wind or solar? And what about Q3 in 2021, when there's a period of up to 6 weeks of no wind in Ireland, and no wind in GB, and no wind in Northwest Europe? So while interconnection is important, it has limited benefits in interconnected systems based on renewables that are all exposed to the same weather anomalies. And that's just the 2021 electricity system. What about when we electrify heat and transport, and we transfer the seasonal patterns from the fossil system to the electrical system? The seasonal variability of heat dwarfs that of the current electricity demand, with over 7 times the difference between the daily minimum and the daily maximum in energy for heat demand. It's a big challenge to flatten this curve. So electrification will further drive the need for seasonal storage, even with increased efficiencies due to better insulation and use of heat pumps. In fossil-based systems, oil, gas, and coal can supply baseload energy and do all the heavy lifting in balancing the energy for electricity demand and heat demand. Dispatchable generation, be it oil, coal, and gas, is ramped up and down to meet electricity demand and heat demand. And there's pressure on the gas demand, as we saw in 2018 with the beast from the east. We diverted the electricity system away from gas and over to coal, oil, and peat to make sure gas was available for residential heat. But in a zero carbon system with high levels of wind, the system imbalance between electricity demand and available renewable generation could be multiples of what we see today, but without the ready access to fossil fuel storage to manage it. So one of the biggest impacts of net zero will be the need to find alternatives to the use of fossil fuels, which supply cheap, large capacity and long duration storage options, and hence supply nearly all the flexibility and resilience that secure Ireland's energy systems today. Let's look back to the 2017 electricity system. Whenever people talk about storage, they think of Turlough Hill. On this scale of days on the x-axis and demand on the y-axis, Turlough Hill is that small dot in the corner. There was significant primary energy storage in Kinsale, which is represented by the large yellow circle, and also coal in the coal yard in Money Point, oil in the oil tanks in Tarbert, and the harvested peat. So if there's a major disruption in fuel supplies, about 80% of system peak could be met for about 4 weeks. And thereafter, about 40% of the peak could be met for a further 10 weeks based on the stored energy. If we move forward to 2025, the gas storage at Kinsale is closed, the peats are closed, Money Point is no longer burning coal, Tarbert is closed under IED. So the primary storage is whatever line pack there is in the gas and the distillate backup as mandated by the grid code for the gas turbines. And I'll remind you, Turlock Hill and the couple of battery projects will be that small little dot in the bottom left on the corner. So we could keep about 66% of the energy system going just for a couple of days. And bear in mind the World Energy Council trilemma I brought to your attention earlier on. We had a score of C there before we lost these primary energy stores. So some would say we have evolved to a large European gas network, and I produced these slides before the situation in Ukraine arose. So the large circles with the flags represent gas usage, and the relative size illustrates the relative consumption of gas across various member states. The smaller circles within the flagged circles stand for the capacity of the gas storage infrastructure in terms of days of gas consumption. So Germany, a large gas user, has infrastructure to store gas to meet its domestic requirements for 96 days. Great Britain is also a large consumer of gas. It has infrastructure to store gas usage to meet its domestic requirements for about 5 days. So Ireland, and we're in the process of closing our only gas storage infrastructure down in Kinsale, which was 2.3 terawatt hours. We're connected at the tail end of a European gas network via a non-EU member state, which itself has very low gas storage capacity compared to its usage. Paul Dean in UCC has repeatedly said, energy supply, it's not just a matter of physics anymore. It's a matter of politics. And while physics is predictable, politics is anything but. So can we assume that UK will keep the gas valves open in case of an emergency? LNG is sometimes raised when talking about energy security. I've added in LNG storage in relevant member states here using the pink dots, and they're hardly even visible, even in countries like Spain and France, which have relatively large LNG infrastructure. So while LNG brings diversity of supply, it doesn't provide resilience in the form of gas storage. There may also be acute short-term demand for LNG in Europe during weather-related low renewable generation events. And in such instances, larger customers are likely to get priority for LNG deliveries. Just to reinforce my earlier point where I spoke about the infrastructure capacity for various member states and the storage of gas, annual gas consumption in Germany and GB, as I said, is similar. And this graph represents the current gas storage in Germany, Italy, France, and UK. Germany's current gas storage is about 24 times that of GB. As I said at the start, we've a long way to go on the decarbonisation journey, despite all the wind farms that have been developed. The SEAI data is very insightful. In 2019, around 90% of our energy use was fossil-based. Net zero needs a lot more renewables. But it's also interesting to look at energy storage that's securing our energy system. So on the right-hand side, again, I've just brought out the primary energy usage based on the SEAI data. The circles on the right are scaled to proportion. The outer circle is standing for the usage, and the inner circle is an estimate of the storage capacity under each fuel. So in 2019, our primary energy usage was 170 terawatt hours, and the storage capacity was equivalent to about 59 days of this energy usage. But we can see the primary energy usage is heavily dependent on fossil fuel. As you can see, the primary energy sources with the most resilient storage capacity are oil, peat, and coal. all on a downward decline as we decarbonise. Wind generation backup in Turlock Hill is Turlock Hill, which is a mere 1.4 hours equivalent back in 2019. So there are about 8.5 weeks of primary energy storage. 96% of this is in the form of oil, peat and coal. So this form of storage needs a zero carbon solution as we move to net zero. The 2019 system, again, I've illustrated here using scale circles. The sources of primary energy storage and oil dwarfs all of the others. We've done estimates for primary energy requirements in a net zero system, and happily we come up with a figure consistent with the UCC figure, about 128 terawatt hours. I'll talk about that later. So in 2050, if we replicate the current levels of primary energy storage of 59 days, that'll require more than 20 terawatt hours of zero carbon energy storage. This graph shows the various technologies to support a zero carbon energy system. We need all of them. And from the short-term timescale to ensure system voltage and frequency are kept stable, right out through the storage to deal with system resilience. Oil storage has traditionally provided this in preparation for global supply shocks. There's an important feature of this graph on the left-hand side, which shows all of the technologies on one graph. The storage capacity on the x-axis and the discharge time on the y-axis. It hides scale. The scale of seasonal storage required is enormous. It'd be the equivalent of 1 trillion Tesla Powerwall domestic batteries. It's equivalent to about 10,000 Turlock Hill pumped storage units. It's equivalent to 500,000 of the ADA BESS projects that was recently commissioned by ESB. So the only solution really we have in Ireland in this space is hydrogen. We don't have nuclear option. We don't have geology suitable for geothermal. So the only solution is renewable hydrogen. Looking forward to 2050 and what that would look like. The EU strategy is to electrify as much as possible. And our estimates are 62 terawatt hours of renewable electricity for end use as electrons. To put that in context, the current electricity system is about 40 terawatt hours. After electrification, there's a need for a renewable molecule. So we see the need for an additional 66 terawatt hours of renewables to produce hydrogen, decarbonise areas that cannot be electrified, including backup generation. So bringing these together, we see the 4 pillars. The renewables, about 30 gigawatts of offshore wind equivalent, hydrogen production, energy storage, and zero carbon dispatchable generation, working together in an integrated manner for a secure, reliable source of renewable energy in the form of electrons or molecules. As I said, the scale of this is huge, 30 gigawatts offshore equivalent. That's even before we tackle new industries like e-fuel for aviation and shipping, which WEI reckon would require an additional 10 gigawatts of offshore wind. It's before we tackle new industries like renewable fertilizers for indigenous use or for export. Or it's before we tackle the export opportunities from countries like Germany or the Netherlands, who already recognise they have a shortfall between their demand for renewable hydrogen and their actual ability to generate it. The key thing in this is energy storage. It's essential and is the key enabler of the net zero system. It acts like the buffer that helps the delivery of all of the other elements and still providing energy security for the transition. We store hydrogen produced by large-scale renewables for use in the hard-to-abate sectors and for zero carbon electricity when the wind isn't blowing, effectively allowing the renewables to back up the renewables. Our targets in Ireland need to reflect net zero. We need to develop a single overall master plan for the transition to net zero by 2050 of the Irish energy sector, electricity, residential, industry and transport to see what can be met by electrification, what needs to be met by renewable hydrogen, and what quantity of renewables we need to meet that. Our estimates are 30 gigawatts, as I said, for offshore wind, 15 gigawatts for hydrogen production, at least 10 gigawatts of zero carbon dispatchable generation, and tens of terawatt hours of energy storage. It has been agreed in many studies that zero carbon electricity system needs to happen before the net zero energy system. So we put out the figures for a net zero electricity system in 2040, and we need to work these back to 2030. And we have recommendations for 2030. And there's a clear gap between the current Irish targets for offshore wind, hydrogen production, zero carbon power generation and storage, and what's actually required. Economic supply chains and the lead times for infrastructure mean that urgent decisions and actions are needed to ensure we meet our net zero targets and ambitious interim milestone targets on the road to net zero. Targets are needed for each of these four elements. For a system similar to Ireland is Denmark. It has a 2 gigawatt ambition for hydrogen production in 2030. To summarise so far, we need to set targets for each element of this four-piece jigsaw for secure, reliable, net zero energy system. We need to set a date for a net zero electricity system by 2040. We need to significantly increase our targets for renewables, in particular offshore wind. We need to accelerate the deployment of floating offshore wind. We need to set ambitious targets for production of green hydrogen. We need to enable development of renewable projects for hydrogen as well as for electricity. And we need to incentivise investment in zero carbon dispatchable power generation and in large scale renewable energy storage infrastructure. And to reiterate what I said earlier, the delivery of all of these needs to be planned and delivered within a whole system integrated approach that aims to align the development of all the elements to build a secure, resilient, reliable system with the best value to the Irish citizen. We at ESB were one of the 135 or so responses to the DEC consultation on hydrogen strategy. And our submission was based on insights gleaned and refined over the last 3 to 4 years. We need to take an integrated energy system approach. Beyond electrification, green hydrogen is required for the hard to abate areas, heavy transport, shipping and aviation, industrial heat and zero carbon generation. To fully decarbonise, we need more than 30 gigawatts of offshore renewables, so we need to harness floating offshore wind. And with the known challenges of building infrastructure in Ireland and the normal project attrition, we'll miss the 2030 5 gigawatt offshore targets with significant consequential future liabilities due to carbon budgets unless we take action. Ireland's hydrogen economy is inextricably linked to Ireland's wind economy. So we need to leverage our existing transmission infrastructure by using hybrid connections to accelerate the development of Ireland's hydrogen industry. To ensure a secure, reliable, resilient, zero carbon energy system, we need enormous quantities of seasonal storage. This will more likely be an offshore geological solution, which will require commercial incentives. Green hydrogen powered by offshore wind is the most likely vector for large-scale energy storage. Zero carbon dispatchable generation powered by green hydrogen is needed to back up the power system when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. And an integrated energy system approach can be delivered by a cross-sector clustered model of offshore wind, hydrogen production, hydrogen storage, distribution to hydrogen customers, and zero carbon dispatchable generation. And if we base this around our coastal generation sites, we can leverage the infrastructure for export. In terms of economic supply chains, if Ireland wants to create a hydrogen industry, we need to be a leader and not a follower. Everyone is decarbonising, and the OEMs will do business where there's strong, ambitious strategies underpinned by strong policy and efficient funding mechanisms. These were our recommendations in terms of the hydrogen strategy. I'm going to call out some of them here. We need to accelerate deployment of floating offshore wind. We need to enable the marine area consent for hydrogen projects. And we need to implement an effective subsidy to incentivise hydrogen production. We need to have a hierarchy of use for renewable hydrogen and focus on the no regrets area, heavy transport, high temperature heat. We need to de-risk and incentivise end users to decarbonise efficiently, affordably and securely. We need to incentivise clusters of hydrogen demand through ambitious targets and efficient funding. And we don't have a large industrial base of hydrogen usage in Ireland, so we need to negotiate agreements for hydrogen export to subsidise and enable rapid scale-up of the Irish hydrogen industry. And in terms of transport and storage, we need to incentivise development of hydrogen production, storage and transport infrastructure via clusters. We need to accelerate the licensing for gas, hydrogen and ammonia storage, and we need to incentivise investment in this infrastructure for seasonal energy storage. So what are ESB doing? We believe in learning by doing, and we're developing what we call lighthouse projects to showcase the role of renewable hydrogen in transport, industry and dispatchable generation. And while these projects won't be profitable, ESB is prepared to invest and is open to work with industries seeking to decarbonise. Hydrogen needs scale, and the success of the hydrogen economy in Ireland is predicated on scaling up of offshore wind. So our approach in scaling up would be to use a clustered approach to solving the problem. At a minimum, ESB believes there should be Dublin, Cork Harbour and Shannon Estuary clusters, but others may be viable or required. So that's an invitation to stakeholders in the Northwest to come and talk to us. ESB Carrington Power Station in GB is now an active member of the HyNet project, which is an innovative, low carbon and hydrogen energy project based around a cluster of industries in the northwest of England. HyNet, through Cadent Gas Networks, have brought the Carrington hydrogen supply forward into 2027, which means that Carrington could be one of the first, if not the first, CCGT to burn hydrogen in the UK. So ESB intends to harness all of that learning to bring back to Ireland. You're also probably aware that ESB and Decarbonix have signed a joint venture agreement to progress large-scale energy storage projects off the coast of Ireland. Since Q2 of last year, we've been working together in terms of assessment and development of Irish offshore green hydrogen subsurface storage. And we believe there's significant potential to develop large-scale storage capacity off the Irish coast, and we tend to actively explore and develop opportunities. We'll focus on east of Dublin's Poolbeg, west of ESB's Green Atlantic at Moneypoint, supporting the Shannon Estuary cluster, and south of Ada in Cork. Project Kestrel in Ada envisages the redevelopment of the decommissioned gas reservoirs at the Kinsale Head field, ultimately for green hydrogen storage. So ESB intends to be a major hydrogen producer in Ireland and for Europe, cognizant of the need to solve our own decarbonisation problems and energy security problems in Ireland first. Energy export has a place, but only in an Irish context. So net zero for ESB in 2040 and net zero for Ireland in 2050 needs an integrated energy system with renewable hydrogen production, dispatchable generation and storage. I'd welcome any questions you have now.